Is Vietnamese poutine a thing? After ordering French fries at a Vietnamese restaurant a while back, I couldn't get the idea out of my head. So, today, I'm going to create it. Let's back up a little bit and talk about poutine. This is a French-Canadian dish that traditionally consists of French fries, brown gravy, and cheese curds. There's quite a bit of lore around its exact origins, but most people agree that it came from rural Quebec in the 1950s. A drive-in restaurant called Le Roi Giuseppe lays claim due to adding gravy to fries on its menu, and then later adding cheese curds at the request of its customers. Café Ideal also claims credit, but the evolution was slightly different. It began with adding cheese curds to fries at the request of customers, and then later adding gravy as a way to keep the dish warm. Bear in mind that the word poutine is maybe derived from the French word for pudding, poutine, and has become a French slang term for a messy mix of foods. Keeping in that spirit, people have created lots of different versions of poutine with different toppings and interpretations. In my opinion, gravy is a requirement. Cheese curds are traditional, but it's not uncommon to see other types of cheese as a substitute. Adding meats, herbs, and other stuff are ways to add some personality to the dish. Now that we've talked about poutine a bit, let's get into why I'm making this specific video. Canada has a strong French influence dating back to France's colonization of eastern Canada in 1535. This influence has carried through in the language, food, and culture of Canada ever since. Poutine is an artifact of that influence. However, Canada is not the only historical French colony. France has had a presence in Vietnam since the 17th century. Formal colonization began in the late 1800s. I'm certainly not here to defend colonization, but that history can profoundly shape the food culture of both countries. The banh mi sandwich is a great example of this, where traditional Vietnamese flavors are combined with a baguette-style roll and pâté. While poutine is profoundly Canadian, I couldn't help but wonder if it could also be Vietnamese. I've never seen Vietnamese poutine before, but I did run across a Vietnamese restaurant in Seattle called Lotus Pond that sells an appetizer of Pho Fries that are served with Pho Gravy. It's a brown gravy seasoned heavily with pho spices, and it's an incredible dipping sauce for fries. I reviewed this dish on my blog and in a short video, but I couldn't get the idea of Vietnamese poutine out of my head. So, I decided that on a future trip, I would take this menu item to the next level and Frankenstein my own version of Vietnamese poutine, or Photine. First off, let me add a disclaimer. I'm not telling anyone else to do this. I actually think it's pretty obnoxious or entitled to go into a restaurant and create your own meal with their ingredients. So, do as I say, not as I do. Maybe Lotus Pond or another Vietnamese restaurant will take inspiration from this idea, and it might become more accessible to others. The biggest challenge I had to creating Phoutine was selecting a cheese to use. The restaurant didn't have any cheese on the menu at all, and I wasn't aware of any traditional Vietnamese cheeses that would make sense. So, after doing some research, I discovered that there is a popular cheese in Vietnam. And to my surprise, it was something that I was pretty familiar with already. Turns out that the Laughing Cow cheese brand is super common in Vietnam and gained popularity during French colonization. This does make some sense because Laughing Cow is a French cheese product dating back to the early 1900s and was much more shelf-stable than traditional French cheeses. This made it easier to transport across the ocean and more appropriate for a tropical climate. Like I said, Lotus Pond didn't have any cheese in the restaurant, so I needed to supply my own. I went to the grocery store and looked through every cheese aisle I could find, but I was having trouble finding exactly what I needed. I finally found the logo, but it was a plant-based version that I had zero interest in. I moved on a little bit further and finally found the round container that I was looking for, and now that I had my secret ingredient, I made my way to the restaurant and prepared myself for the task ahead. I ordered the Pho Fries and a bowl of pho with meatballs and rare steak. The pho arrived first, and the broth smelled intoxicating. While I waited for the fries, I decided to eat some noodles, and the soup was delicious. So warm and comforting. Fortunately, the fries arrived shortly after, and I could start cobbling together the Phoutine. I clocked the fries at 197 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that they were super fresh and could easily help melt the cheese. I noted that they were fried to a dark gold with visible flakes of salt throughout. I measured them at about 7 millimeters, just over a quarter of an inch, and was impressed with the slightly rough, crispy texture. This was an improvement from my last visit, which means they either changed products or they improved their technique. Outstanding job on the fries, regardless. I transferred the fries from the basket to a plate and then proceeded to open the Laughing Cow cheese. This was much more difficult than I anticipated, but I eventually found the exterior string and then worked on opening the individual triangles. Again, harder than it should have been, but that's on me. I placed 3 triangles of cheese on the fries and then poured the Pho Gravy over the top. Laughing Cow tastes like a blend of cream cheese and something like Comté or Brie, so it softened with the heat and began to incorporate into the fries. From here, I added a few slices of the meatball and the steak from the soup, and I was careful not to introduce too much broth onto the fries. Next up was chili garlic and hoisin sauces, a squeeze of lime, and then garnish with Thai basil and some bean sprouts. Not gonna lie, this looked amazing. For the sake of full transparency, I asked for a fork, but I never received one. I was also feeling extremely self-conscious and I didn't want to bother the staff again, so I went ahead and kept eating with the chopsticks that they provided earlier. I wasn't trying to show off. Poutine is not an easy meal to eat with chopsticks, but I did my best. I poked around and tried creating bites that had fries, cheese, gravy, and meat together. I think it was totally worth the effort. The fries maintained enough of their crispy texture to stand up to the wet ingredients, and that starchy base paired so well with the creamy cheese, the heavily spiced gravy and the tender meatballs and steak, and the zippy savory sauces. The whole thing was super aromatic with dynamic texture and flavor contrasts. It worked so well. I ate the Phoutine and then tried to make as much of a dent in the soup that I could. I made it about halfway through and then booked a first-class ticket for one on the struggle bus. I just couldn't eat anymore despite how much I enjoyed it. Rest assured that I took the leftovers home. So, back to my original question. Is Vietnamese poutine a thing? The answer is decidedly no. But I think that I've proven that it could be, and maybe even that it should be. I have a couple more ideas of untested poutine varieties that I think would be interesting, but please drop a note in the comments for something that you think I should try. I'd love to hear from you, and while you're at it, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps motivate me to do more of these videos. Big thanks to Lotus Pond for hosting me. I spent about $24 on the fries and pho, and I think I got my money's worth. If you stop by, show your server that you follow me on social media. They won't know what you're talking about, but I think it'd be hilarious. Thanks again, everybody, and stay crispy.